Well, good morning, Crossroads. My name is Jake. I am one of the pastors here, and so thank you for joining us this morning. If you're watching online, wherever you're watching, thank you for joining us. Well, you could be doing anything, you could be watching anything, and you joined us this morning. We encourage you, as you're watching online, to engage with the message. There will be some fun engagement as we go through. We're in our third week of our series called With Us, where we're kind of journeying through this story of Advent. And I don't know if you're like me, but I grew up in a church that didn't really do Advent. Like, how many of you grew up in a church that practiced Advent? How many of you grew up in a church that didn't really practice Advent? So kind of like 50-50. So I grew up in a church where we killed the turkey during Thanksgiving and then Jesus was born. Like, there was no in between. Like, we're already singing Joy to the World December 1st. But Advent is a time of preparation and longing for Christ to come and to be with us. It's this idea that God has come, he saw our neighborhood, and decided he's going to stay with us. And so in this series, we're talking about God Emmanuel with us. And we've talked about some ways that we don't live a with us type of life with God. That sometimes being with God and having our longings be filled by him gets replaced by other ways. And so if you've been with us last 2 weeks, or if you haven't, we've talked about how sometimes our life with God comes and takes other forms. In the first week, we talked about how sometimes we try to move God's hand in our life. Maybe God isn't working at the timeline that we would like, and so we try to speed things up. And there's some families in Scripture that tried that, and then the results were disastrous when they tried to move God's hand. We also talked about last week how sometimes things happen and we expect God to act in ways that we want him to act. And it's a very common way. How many of you have ever had someone in your life get sick, or a kid or a family member go through something tough and you prayed for them? All of us, right? How many of you have ever prayed, but what you got wasn't exactly what you were praying for? That causes questions, right? That causes us concern, and sometimes that can move our relationship with God from being with God to other ways. And today we're talking about a life that's from God, and I have a definition for us. It simply means this: it's wanting God's blessings and gifts, but not necessarily God himself. It's using God to get our desires, and it focuses on consuming and consumption of things, of person, places, and things. This type of life, it reminds me of the pastor that planted a church. Good things started to happen. People started to come to Christ, and it started to grow and grow and grow. So they bought a building. They got multiple campuses. And the next thing you know about this pastor is you're reading on the news that they had an affair. It's the businessman who started to do very well at work and continued to get promotion after promotion, moved up in his company, and as they started to get a higher paycheck, that lifestyle also started to increase as their income increased. And then they got to the point where they could not afford their lifestyle anymore, and so they started to do some things, and they started to embezzle some money. It's the parents that grew up in humble families. They didn't have much growing up, and they didn't want that for their kids. And so they worked and they strived and got their kids the best of opportunities to make sure that they wouldn't be without. But next thing you know, they're missing birthday parties and special events, and they're putting their kids in things that their kids don't even like. But they're churning this out because they want what's best for their kids. It's the story of a company that started out small and started to make money. It was an eco company, green, wanting to do good things in this world. And then they started to turn a profit. And their actions started to destroy the environment that they claimed they were trying to help out. All these stories kind of have something in common. They're chasing satisfaction. They're chasing purpose and meaning, and they're coming up short. And this chase leads to the continual consumption of person, places, and things. And this morning we're going to be in the Old Testament. We're going to be looking at a gentleman named David, who is one of the famous kings of Israel. We're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we're going to take a look at David's life, how he lived a with God type of life. Good things were happening. He was being blessed by God and was being a blessing to others. But then he got to a point in his life where he had enough, and something changed in him. And no longer was he just satisfied with the blessings and his relationship with God. He started to consume people, places, and things, where the love of God moved to the love of the blessing. And it's so easy for our hearts and ourselves to find ourselves in this space because there are so many things trying to tell you what you should like, what you should love, what you should care about, what should get your justice button going. There's so many things out there vying for our attention of what you should care about. And so today, what we're talking about is really the question of what satisfies the longings of our hearts, what satisfies the longing of our souls, and then who or what has your heart? Who or what has your heart? See, we were created to be with God. From the beginning of time, that was supposed to be our orientation towards God, was just to be with God. But when that longing shifts, we become obsessed with filling that longing with almost anything and everything else. And we start to consume until we are satisfied. But we find out that things of this world just don't satisfy us the right way. And they can't satisfy us. And so we go on this journey of consuming and consuming and consuming. Now, I have a confession for you. My name is Jake Roberts, and I'm a consumer. Thought you didn't know that. I want you to turn to your neighbor. I want you to say your name, and I want you to confess the same thing. Say your name and say, and I am a consumer. So go ahead. Turn to your neighbor. Go ahead, talk in church. Chat it up. If you're online, type it in. So I got a question for you. Since we're talking about like consuming, what are some of your favorite brands? You can just shout them out. If you're watching online, this is where please fill up the chat. I'll go back and look and see what taste or not taste you have. Just kidding. But what are some of your favorite brands? Chick-fil-A. All right, the Lord's chickens. Yes, those calories belong to the Lord. Saved, sanctified, they are His. Praise Jesus for that chicken, right? What else? What? On the border, okay. Texas Roadhouse, yeah, those calories are not on the Lord. Trust me, those rolls, whew, good stuff though. What else? Okay. All right, how about this? I'm going to show some brands, and let me know if like these are kind of some of your brands. We'll start pretty easy. How about this one? Yeah. All right. I made fun of this in first service. I'm like, you can get the same fleece for like $50 less just without the logo. And then I was like, I own 2 of them. All right, how about this next one? I mean, they got us hook, line, and sinker. I mean, it's a cult, and I'm stuck. Like, it's the worst. It's true. What about this next one? Yeah, like how many of you been at a restaurant and you're like, the server comes up and they're like, what will you have to drink? You're like, oh, I'll do a Coke. Like, well, we have Pepsi products. So, you do the right thing and you get up and leave. Because that's not an alternative. Pepsi. What are they thinking? How about this one? Yeah, how many of you are excited about like the adult sippy cups? Because that way you don't dribble and then you get really excited because you're not dribbling and then your coworkers are looking at you like, you're 4. You're 4. Something wrong with you all. But I had to put it in there. No sippy cups, just poor taste. Here's the thing. These companies, they're banking on us just wanting more. So one of my favorite companies is Noble. The next slide image is one of their items. Aren't those amazing? Those are shoes, if you can't tell. Noble is a CrossFit company. They supply gear for like working out and things like that, like working out belts, shoes, all kinds of different things. One of my absolute favorite brands. They're like kind of like understanding is that like male birds out in the wild are very colorful. So they bring that to working out. I'm not kidding. You could ask the other pastors. I have these hot pink high tops that I wear on Wednesday nights because it's youth group and Tim said I couldn't wear them today because they're very distracting. I have a hot pink donut belt because I'm working out, but I'm also like wanting donuts. So that's why I work out to eat. Yeah, whatever. I have a hot pink shirt. It's just a nightmare. But this company, they put this in their marketing, and then they also have these athletes that you're like, bodies shouldn't be able to look like that. And they like pull you in like, don't you want to look like this? It's like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. But what they don't tell you is like these people work out for like 4 hours a day. They have very strict diets. And this is all they do. Their job is to look aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And here's what they did on Black Friday, and they're jerks for this. So, favorite company. On Black Friday, they dropped their holiday collection. On Saturday, they drop another collection. On Cyber Monday, they drop this collection. And then on Tuesday, they drop their everyday wear collection for people who don't want to work out but still want to wear fun spandexy clothes. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't have enough money. Like, this is not cool. And here's the thing. Our favorite brands don't care about our needs. They only desire our wants. They don't care about our needs. They only desire our wants. These companies understand our wiring and our desire for more, and they're banking on the desire of us not knowing when enough is enough. They're banking on us understanding that we want to love everything we buy, but hate everything that we own. That's marketing 101. Love everything you buy, but hate everything that you own. And this is a great brand. They do a lot of stuff for like adaptive sports to make sure that those, and also with veterans that are coming home, they pour money into that community. It's a great company, but at the end of the day, none of that matters. They want my money. They want me to spend. And this is something that we have in common, you and I. We are consumer. There are things that we want, and there are things that we desire. Got another question for you. How many of you have ever bought something on an impulse? I've seen some hands raised. You know, like maybe you're watching the infomercials at night and you see a knife that can cut a brick and you're like, no. How many of you ever bought something that you never used? Okay. How many of you have bought something that didn't live up to the advertising? You know, as your spouse is yelling at you, you're like, it's supposed to cut a brick, and it's not cutting the brick. You know, because you bought the brick-cutting knife. That's not a self-fulfilling story, I promise. How many of you ever upgraded to a new phone just because the newer one just came out? Stop it. How many of you have ever bought something simply because it was on sale? Like, you would be losing money if you didn't buy it. It is on sale. They're practically giving it away. And your significant other's looking at you like, I married you. Sickness and in health and in poor shopping habits, I guess. But it's so easy to get sucked in. It's a problem that we all share. There's ads on our phones. There's commercials. And this is like my least favorite thing this time of year. Like when like cologne and perfume commercials come on. Because you're like, what are they selling and what is happening? You'll notice it's the worst commercial where you feel like you have to avert your gaze, and then they're at the end, they're like, Dolce & Gabbana. Like, oh, thank you. Thought something was about to happen. Very disturbing. There's billboards, and then recipes. How many of you have ever gone online and you're just trying to find like the perfect recipe for like Christmas cookies, and they give you like their life story, something that happened to their second cousin twice removed on their mother's side, and then there's a bunch of ads for all these things you don't need, and then at the end you're like, wait, where's your recipe? And you maybe find it on like the 4th page. This week, how many of you have ever talked about something and then you just started getting ads for it? And then like the tin foil on your head is just like, okay, all right, I'm being watched. So this happened this week. We were in staff meeting on Tuesday, and we were talking and sharing, and in the middle of our staff eval, we eval our services, I brought up a book by a gentleman named John Mark Comer. Now it's all going to show up on your phones, creepy. He's a pastor in Portland, and I was talking with Nan, and after we got back from lunch, Nan got an email for an advertisement for that book. That's a very niche, like, why? They're listening. But I want to, before we continue, I want to kind of set the record straight. Buying things isn't bad. This isn't a sermon on buying or not buying. Often our buying is pretty neutral. If you need gas, you got to get gas. If you need to eat, you need to eat. But it's our consumption and our search for satisfaction, are consuming that can lead to damage. When consumption runs rampant, people get hurt, places get destroyed, and things become a part of trying to satisfy our longing that they simply can't satisfy. When you start hiding all those purchases and things from your spouse because you're afraid of the debt that you have accrued. It's when you start seeing things on your phone and computer and you continue to watch, you're clearing your browsing history and you're caching your cookies so no one knows what you're doing, but you know exactly what you're consuming. It's when you're tearing others down because you're completely insecure about who you are and what you look like. You look in the mirror and you only notice the things that don't add up to those to the left and to the right of you. It's when the gratitude starts being non-existent and you're no longer thankful for what you have been given. It's when you start seeing people as a means to an end just to get things done. It's when you start finding comfort in substances that simply cannot satisfy you. And that's what we're talking about. When the love of God is replaced. When our longing shifts for longing of God, for longing of things of this world. And this is something that Jesus talked often about in the New Testament. So let's stand as we read this verse together. It's from Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. So let's read this together. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Where your heart is, there your treasure is as well. Where you spend your time, your talent, your resources, that's where the things matter the most to you. If you were to print out your bank statement, the things that you spend the money on, our bank statements, our budgets, our moral documents, they really kind of declare what we care the most about. We may say one thing with our mouth, but our money and where we put it doesn't lie. You may print it out and you may say, I care about the things that I care about, like my family. I've got to continue to clothe my kids, and they do this weird thing where they keep growing. I just bought my kids shoes, and now I got to buy more shoes, and those shoes are, right? You may be buying stuff for your house to keep your car going back and forth to work. But when it comes to seeing people around you in need, what does that say about where your treasure is? Jesus continues on and he says this, no one can serve two masters. You will either hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. What Jesus is saying is once you start to long for other things, those other things and God, they don't mesh well. They don't work. If it's power you're looking for, it's power that's going to win out. If it's prestige you're looking for, money, wealth, sex, whatever it may be, it's going to dethrone God's place in your heart because we cannot serve two masters. And there's a battle for our hearts, our minds, and our souls going on because there's so many other things and suitors that want what we have to give and want who we are. Our hearts long to be satisfied, but that satisfaction, that deep meaning, that peace, that comfort and longing can only be found in Jesus. And this gets us to the story of King David. I love the story of King David. King David came on the scene in the times where Israel was looking to the left, looking to the right. And they're like, hey, they got a king. I want a king. And so a guy named Saul was appointed. He did some dumb stuff, and the favor of the Lord was taken from him. And so God raised up a prophet named Samuel and said, hey, I want you to go and I want you to anoint one of Jesse's sons. Problem is, he has 8. So he gets there, he arrives, and he sees this really good looking dude. And he's like, that's gotta be the one. Like if I'm, setting up a coup for a new king, I can market that. He looks good. Everybody's gonna think he looks good. But God's like, no. And that's where we get the phrase, man looks on the outside appearance, but God looks at the heart. Continue on, and then they get to this $120, tiny little guy named David, a shepherd out in the field that his dad practically just forgot about. Like, oh yeah, I have another son. Yeah, David, I'll go get him. And so he gets him, and he is anointed king. But there's a problem. Someone should tell the other king. He's still in charge. There comes a time where David's influence starts to grow, and it happens in this moment with a guy named Goliath. It's a story many of us in the church have heard about. This guy named Goliath, the Israelites and the Philistines were at war. They were in encampments, and this big guy would come out every morning and be like, hey, I'm going to take you guys on. How about this? Send out your best. We'll send out our best. You beat us. We'll be your slaves. We beat you. The other shoe, you become our slaves. Big dude. Israel's like, no, we're going to stay in our defensive position. We can't take on one guy, but like we could stay back here. And on happen chance, David comes and he hears this. And something rises up in him. And he's like, no, I'll take care of this. King Saul hears this, is like, hey, I'll give you my armor. And David's like, nah, it's just not going to fit. I got this. Get some stones, a sling, and he goes out. And one of the most underrated passages, verses in all Scripture, I love this. 1 Samuel 17:48, it says that the Philistine moved closer to attack him, and David ran to meet him. I'm not a large dude. In school, yeah, I was the kid that was really tiny. And I remember having bullies. And my first inclination was not, let's run towards the danger. It was, teacher! Like, I'm a small, tiny dude. That's a big dude. I'm in trouble. But David wins out. And he gains favor and more favor. And Saul sees this, and guess what probably happens? He gets jealous. And so as David is in Saul's care, Saul starts to get tormented, and David is the only one who can soothe him, so he's playing music, and Saul tries to kill David and wants to kill David, and he goes on a run, starts running for his life, gets help from King Saul's son, Jonathan. And while on the run, he has two opportunities to kill Saul. How many of you have ever been put in a place that you've had someone be mean to you, or you've had someone do some things to you, but then the shoe goes on the other foot, and you have the opportunity to get back at them? This is David. He had the opportunity to get even and to make things right, and he doesn't. Saul goes into a cave to relieve himself, and David doesn't kill him. Saul's laying down in the middle of an encampment. One of David's friends like, hey, let's go take care of this. So they go in, and David just takes his spear and walks away. David was satisfied in God. David was satisfied with being with God, but then something happens. David's attitudes, his hearts, going from being in need to having enough to having excess, something changed in David. And this is where we pick him up in 2 Samuel 11. And it says this, in the spring at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Red flag. This David who killed Goliath, who did all this wonderful things, who didn't enact revenge, is acting very unkingly and very un-David-like. He's sending his men out when he's supposed to be with him, and he's staying home. One evening, David walked up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. It was cooler there, best airflow. A lot of people slept on the top of their roofs, and David's palace was probably at the highest spot for vantage points down below. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. When I was young, I always thought it was funny that she's bathing and her name's Bathsheba. I was like, oh, so clever, Bible writers. And then I realized like it's in a different language. I'm like, oh, now I feel dumb. Never mind. I was 4, so it's okay. But he sees her. Then David sent messages to get her. He's king. He's got power, prestige. He takes what he wants. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanliness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I'm pregnant. I've heard this taught a lot of ways. And when I was growing up as a young man in youth group, I was taught, like, Bathsheba was showing what she had and was trying to trick David. To be on the lookout because women are out to get you. 1, that's dumb. 2, that's not what this is saying. There's a major power difference going on here. He's king. She is nothing. What he says goes. Because if you go against what he says, your livelihood tends to disappear. And David is in a state where he's not the man he once was. Bathsheba is absolutely innocent here. But then she comes back and says, I'm pregnant. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite, and Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were doing, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. David is trying to make this thing go away. He's trying to fix it. He knows he messed up. And instead of confessing right away, he is trying to do what most of us do. We try to act like it didn't happen, or we try to cover our mistakes without ever admitting that we have messed up. David told Uriah so Uriah left the palace, gave him a gift, but Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come home from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents. My people and my men, they haven't been home. They haven't been with their family. They've been working and doing all this for the kingdom. I'm going to be with them. And my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. So how could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. He's like, okay, this ain't working. His character's too good, so I'm going to get him tipsy. I'm not just going to get him tipsy. I'm going to put it to where he can't even walk straight, see straight. I'm going to get him drunk. And maybe, just maybe, what ounce of character is a little bit there after all of his diminishes are gone, maybe this will work. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. So David took care of it. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him. Put him out front and then step back. So while Joab in the city was under siege, he put Uriah at the place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. And David takes Bathsheba as his own, because he can. And that's the end of that story. Why do we try to hide our sin? Why do we, when we mess up, why do we do this? I think part of it is we don't believe that God is truly good. I think some of us see God as that parent who's waiting to discipline us, who's waiting for us to mess up because we're never good enough. But that's not God. That's not the God who has chosen to be with us, to see us in our neighborhood and decide to love us enough to stay put. God truly is good, even when we think he won't be. Doesn't mean that there's going to be consequences, that the consequences will go away. But God is truly good. Jesus said earlier, as we read Matthew, that there's a battle for our heart, and many of us are losing that battle because there are enticing suitors everywhere we look. There's people that want you to become something. There's people that are trying to get your attention to be for something. Your work, your job, your school, whatever it may be. There's so many things that are against the ways of God. So what can we do? What can we do if we're noticing our lives starting to get off track? What can we do if we're starting to know that we're moving from our longing being filled with God to being filled with other things? One of the things that we can simply do is you can just get a checkup done. Very, very simple, like going and taking your car in or taking yourself into the doctor. Talk to friends, talk to family, talk to mentors, spend time in prayer, journal, and start to ask yourself, where am I drifting away? Am I finding myself loving things of this world and not so much loving God? Am I putting more emphasis on my job than my kids? Am I putting more emphasis on what's going on in my own life and I'm not caring and seeing those around us. And if that's you, the next thing we can do is take time to rekindle or foster our relationship with God. Some of us may have just gotten off track. The busyness of the season can do that, and maybe you simply need to take a step back and get back into a habit of hearing from God, adding back in quiet time, because it's in that quiet time where God's voice cuts through the noise. It's still a still, small voice, but we hear it so much more clearly when we spend quiet time. But what if you're like David? What if you found yourself where you are in the middle of a mess up? You're watching your life burn around you because of your decisions, because of what you have done, or even maybe what's been done to you. You need to ask for forgiveness. This is step one. Our spiraling trajectory of trying to find satisfaction and consumption of things that can't fill us, that only God can, will take us to places that we never saw ourselves going. But it's only when we say, God, I can't do this alone and I need you, that we get to turn back around. I love this tweet. It's an image from Rich Villodas, one of my favorite pastors in New York. And it says this: the Gospel of Luke, the prodigal son doesn't return home because of the renewed love for his father. He comes back home simply to survive because he ran out of money and is starving. And his father is perfectly fine with that. Just come home. God wants you home. If you're far from God, come home. God welcomes you with open arms, no matter what you've said, done, or become, or what you are currently doing. God will welcome you home. But sometimes forgiveness isn't enough, and you need to get help. This can come in the form of mentors. This has come in the form of counselors. There have been times in my life where I've had to go to counseling, where I haven't had the tools necessary to be able to navigate what I'm going through. And I have people in my life that can speak into my life that say, hey, Jake, you're a jerk right now. There's something going on. What is it? And they know me well enough to be able to speak into my life, to tell me what I need to hear, not just what I know I want to hear. So it might be counseling. We have a group here called Celebrate Recovery if you're going through things that may be causing addiction, but get help. Jesus cares about you and he cares about me. He cares about our hearts, who we are becoming, and how we treat his good creation. The person, the places, and the things that inhabit it. And we have such a propensity for good when we truly find our longing with God. I want to end with one last question. What would life look like if we ended our journey for satisfaction at the only destination that can truly satisfy the longings of our soul? What if we stopped searching and we just simply said, Jesus, only you alone can satisfy. Only you can give me purpose and meaning in a world that is full of multiple purposes and different meanings. What would happen if our chase for meaning and purpose ended because we are now satisfied in Christ? What would it look like to be truly satisfied in Christ? Let me give a couple examples. This is what it might look like. You get up on the scale and you see that number and you're like, I am more than what is on this scale. You get that paycheck and you notice that it's not as much as you would like and as much as what you're worth, but you notice and you see it and you're like, I am worth more than this paycheck. You see the things of your life that you've accumulated. You look on your office wall and you see your diplomas and you're more than your diplomas. You see the job that you were laid off from and it hurts, but you realize that you are more than the sum of other people's opinions. You see the terrible things that your friends have said about you, and you are more than what they've said. You are more than that spouse that no longer loves you. God came to redeem, renew, and restore you. He saw your life not as it will be, but as it is. He saw your neighborhood, wasn't freaked out by it, and said, I'm going to invest here in their life where they're at, even if they never reciprocate it back to me. We'll continue to long until we are satisfied in Christ. But once you find that satisfaction, your life is opened up in so many beautiful ways because we have been blessed by God in order to be blessings to those around us. If that's you, say yes to God. If you're far away, come home. And if you need help, we are here for you. No matter what your say is going to push us away. We exist for each other. Let's continue in worship with this last song.